Hello and welcome to a CX Moment. As always, we're going to talk about customer experience, but today we're also going to go deep into leadership, risk, successes, and some failures. Our guest today, Sarah Robb O'Hagan, is the author of Extreme You, Step Up, Stand Out, Kick Ass, and Repeat. She's also the CEO of Exos, the former CEO of Flywheel Sports, a past executive of Virgin, Nike. Seriously, this woman has it going on, and she has great tales to tell and great lessons for us all to learn. And please, she loves questions. I love questions, so drop any and all of them into the Q&A, and we will get around to answering them. And by the way, we have a couple extremers, which you will learn what an extremer is momentarily, following along on Twitter. Mariah Bridges and Jonathan Levitt are going to give us a play-by-play, so please follow along with their conversation or check back with them after the broadcast. And of course, if you like what you hear, please share it using hashtag CXMoment. Now that we've got all the basics covered, let's go ahead and get started. I'm Sarah Reed from Zendesk, and let's say hello to Sarah Robb O'Hagan.
Hi, Sarah. So
Hey,
good to see
Sarah.
you.
It's good.
Hello, team. Yeah, it's so neat to be here from all over the world.
That is right. And we were supposed to talk in March of 2020, so I'm thrilled that like 17 months or so later, we figured this out.
Totally. It's worth it in the end. It's worth it, team. It's
It
good.
really is. And I am going to let you kick this all off,
Ooh,
and then I'll pop back on here in 15, 20 minutes or so and
perfect.
join you for a little bit of conversation and Q&A.
Can't wait. That's
All
going to be
right.
awesome. Awesome. Well, it's great to meet everyone out there. I know we are literally all over the world. So I always like to start my sort of talks with an introduction of like, who am I and where am I from? So we are going to talk today about stepping up, standing out, kicking ass, and repeating. But you have to start by going, well, where did those thoughts come from? So I am actually from New Zealand, and I don't know if we have any Kiwis in the audience today, but it is otherwise known as Aotearoa, which was the name that was given to it by the Maori people who discovered this country about 1,000 years ago when they came down in giant canoes from Hawaii, which I think we can all agree is pretty badass, right? Like that's where it kind of starts. And one of the things I love about coming from a country like New Zealand, we have just finished the Olympic season, is we are a country that is super passionate about sport. So when I was a young kid, I remember watching the 1984 Olympics, 84, I don't know if anyone's as old as me, that were in Los Angeles here in the United States. And our Kiwis, we won the most medals that we had ever won. You guys, we won 12 medals. And you're like, seriously? Listen to me for a second. We were number one on the per capita medals table. And most importantly, we were a country that every medal that we won was the sport that involved sitting down. And you may go, are you kidding me? I'm not. Horse riding, cycling, kayaking, canoeing, sailing, like these sports have nothing in common with each other except that the athlete sits down. Fast forward 2021 Olympics, same thing happened, except we got 20 medals and we actually added a couple of new sports this year too. And I share this funny story for a reason, and that's because, as you saw from the title of my talk, I believe it takes extreme focus to achieve extraordinary results. Just like the little Kiwis said, we're going to focus on the sitting down sports. I feel super lucky in my career. You can see I've worked at some of these amazing global brands and companies, Virgin, Nike, Gatorade. And what a lot of them have in common is they really focus on the one thing that they stand for in the market and they don't get distracted by other things going on around them. And why this is important, I believe, is because the landscape is moving so quickly. I mean, innovation, the pace of innovation was fast enough pre-COVID. Think about what's just happened in the last 18 months. I know in every one of your businesses, everywhere you turn, people are solving far faster problems for the consumer and the customer. And it means like you have to really be willing to move quickly. So today's reality, I think we can all agree, industries and jobs have permanently shifted. Look at what we are doing here. We were just talking, Sarah and I, about the platform that we're on today, a platform that the first piece of code was written at the beginning of the pandemic. Like we are now moving into a world where doing things virtually is normal. Jobs are moving. Low barriers to entry means there is unprecedented competition. It's way easier to jump into your business or your industry than it ever was before. And I believe that what got us here won't necessarily get us there. And you think about great stories of companies that have been able to pivot and move and stay ahead of changes, like Netflix when they moved from DVDs to streaming. That's kind of the orientation that we're all in now, right? In this reality of everyday living. So I believe to keep up in this environment, you have to go extreme. And what do I mean by that? Well, a few years ago, I was lucky enough to go on this research journey that led to me writing my book. And I studied both companies, leaders, and then individuals that were at the top of their game in all different walks of life. You can see some of the faces on this page, from Condoleezza Rice, I think we can agree is a total badass, through to athletes like Bodie Miller, the skier, through to on the far right, Mr. Cartoon, who's a very famous tattoo artist from Los Angeles. And what was so interesting is all of these people who are crushing it at the top of their game, even though it might be an artist, an athlete, a politician, they might use different language to describe how they did it, but a lot of their conceptual approaches were the same. And I call that going extreme. So, what does this conceptually mean? It starts with you. So, each of you sitting on this call tonight, extreme you, like who are you at your most passionate and your highest skilled place? Like, what are the things you do when you come to work that you absolutely know you crush it at and you get really inspired by? If you can understand the intersection of those two things, that is you playing to your best extreme. And then when you're in an extreme team, that's when you go, okay, I'm going to find the other people in the organization that are kind of the total opposite skill set to me or areas of interest to me, because together we can get things done by relying on each other as opposed to trying to be all rounders, all of us. And then, of course, an extreme organization is when everyone's playing to their best potential, but collectively working towards a very, very focused and common goal. So, with that in mind, I'm going to go through quickly 3 lessons I thought would be helpful for this group today that I learned from interviewing and doing a bunch of research in terms of how to stay at the top of our game in this kind of environment. So, the first one is what I like to call igniting your magic drive, that moment when you just feel so driven, so fired up to get your work done, to get your tasks done, your projects done, or take on the big goals in your life. So interestingly, we start with the story of Michael Jordan, and that would be what I call the struggle of success. We spend so much time in our careers and lives trying to hit that next success, that sales target, that big client you want to land, the promotion you want to get. And what actually sometimes happens is when you're successful, you suddenly actually find your motivation waning because you're sitting there going, well, wait, I've already climbed that mountain. Now what do I do? It's really funny. When you look at the story around why Michael Jordan retired from basketball the first time round, he said, basically, at this particular time in my career, I've reached the pinnacle. I've achieved a lot. And therefore, I don't feel I have anything else for myself to prove. To prove. So think about yourself. Like, how do you figure out how to ignite that drive again by having something new to prove? So it starts with the joy of what I call true motivation. So motivation is a really interesting topic, right? What makes some people be super motivated more so than others? And so when I was writing my book, we studied Daniel Pink, the author who actually wrote the book called Drive. And he talks about how there are 2 types of motivation in the world. And basically those that are fueled by intrinsic motivation and those of us who are fueled by extrinsic. So extrinsic means I am motivated to achieve sort of external things, more money, more fame, anything like awards, things that like put me on a pedestal that make me look like I'm doing really well to the world. And interestingly enough, intrinsically motivated people are ones that are very motivated internally by improving their own skill sets in a job, by achieving a goal that they've set for themselves. And what's interesting is that in the long term, the intrinsically motivated people way outperform the extrinsically motivated. So even though you have people on your team who may come to work going, I'm wanting a promotion, you might want to spend time saying to them, well, what's underlying that? Like, what's the thing inside of you that's driving that? Because if you can get into that intrinsic motivation and really turn it on, you can trigger much more drive. I also believe in finding higher mountains to climb. I know Sarah's into the great outdoors. Those of us who are hikers know that when you climb a hill or a mountain, it's not until you get to the top of it that you realize right behind it, there might be an even bigger mountain to climb. And I love this metaphor as you think about motivation. So when you've achieved a goal like Michael Jordan, it's not terribly motivating to do the same goal again. If you push out the goal line a little further, it's amazing how that can trigger your drive. But it's important to find that higher mountain, but not so big that it's overwhelming. We've all had sales targets that by the first month in the cycle, you know you can't hit them. So you've got to figure out how to set the goal line exactly the right place that pushes you and the team, but doesn't make it so overwhelming and demotivating because you can't hit it. And then lastly, put it all on the line. If you want to trigger your own drive and motivation, the best thing you can do is tell your friends, your colleagues, your loved ones about the goal you're trying to achieve. When you tell people, even though, by the way, they often won't even notice that you told them or remember, you feel like you're accountable to someone and it makes you work a heck of a lot harder. All right, our second concept is what I like to call break yourself to make yourself. And that's the idea of like, even when you're doing really well in your job or whatever the area is that you're trying to be really great at, you've got to be willing to break yourself, get uncomfortable to unleash new growth. And I have a great example here. We've all been that person at some point in our career where we've said, oh my God, no one would ever do that. No one would ever use that product or service. And I will give you a funny example from my industry. I'm in the fitness industry, and back in the day, like the way we would do indoor spinning or cycling was like in the really sweaty rooms with a bunch of about 30 instructor. And I can remember being in a room when the concept of what is now known as Peloton was pitched, this idea of doing cycling in your own home streamed to you from a central studio. And everybody poo pooed it. They're like, oh, there's no way anyone would do that. Cycling's all about the sweat and energy in the room. Well, fast forward now, I'm sure no matter where you are in the world, you have heard of Peloton. It is a multi-billion-dollar juggernaut. And it's just a good example of sometimes when we're so good at things and we know things work in such a profoundly good way, we're almost unwilling to believe there can be a better way. And it's so important not to be that person. So, the road ahead, what can we learn? I so love the Netflix story, as I referenced before, because that was one of those examples where, by the way, they were building their streaming business years before bandwidth around the world would have enabled that business to exist. But obviously, their founder could see that was where the world was moving to. And as they say in the quote, we never spent 1 minute trying to save the DVD business. So they were in the DVD delivery business originally, and they used that business to make sure it continued to be profitable, to use the cash to fund and invest in their future growth and shift to streaming. But they didn't try and save it and make it kind of return when the consumer behavior was clearly going to shift. So it takes courage to lean into a new approach. I know you all have been going through this like we have in the pandemic. Sarah was sharing with me some amazing stories of how some of you out there were having to like pivot to get laptops into customer service people's hands within a week so that they could do their job. Like we've all had to pivot. And it's super important to recognize that it does take courage to do things that we haven't done before, but you've got to be willing to have that courage to try. Like as a leader, what are you going to do to show your team that you're getting super out of your own comfort zone so that they feel equally willing to try something they haven't done before? So I always tell myself, what can you do to break yourself as a leader? Like, what are you doing in your day-to-day role right now that's comfortable, that you can say, you know what, I'm going to choose to get out of my comfort zone. And if it's not in your day-to-day role, do it in your personal life. Go take on a running event or learn to play the piano, something that makes you feel uncomfortable, that really gets you out of your comfort zone. So you have that feeling of being a novice again and wanting to learn new stuff. Okay, and then lastly, to bring us home, my third great lesson from my book was what I call bringing out the extreme in others. So this notion that actually as leaders, if we can really focus on bringing others in our team to be the most extreme they can be, to play to their greatest potential, gee, that will be great for the whole team. And I'm going to give you a great example. I now am CEO of a company called Exos, and what we do is we actually train professional athletes to play on the field of play, whether it's here in the United States, these are NFL players or Olympians, etc. But what's really interesting about our company founder, who's the coach that started the company, how he trains elite athletes, is you would think that an elite athlete would just want alone time, like to be trained on their own, to be super private, da 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 da. Well, the way we do it is we train them in groups because we know that when you put a group of athletes together, instantly it lifts their game when they see how well the others are training, and like it takes their performance to the next level. Have you ever played tennis with someone better than you and it just lifts your game? So think about that in the business context. If you focus your time on elevating others in the group around you, by definition they will elevate you and the whole group move up at the same time. Likewise, I really believe in partnering with those least like you. I love this picture. It's from the ESPN Body issue a number of years ago. These are all Olympic gold medalists, but look how different they look, shapes and sizes, and yet they are the best in their sport. And it's a wonderful metaphor for work. Often we tend to hang out with the marketing people if we're marketers, or the finance people if we're finance people. Well, go find the people in the business that is so different to you, whether it's style, whether it's where they come from, whether it's the function they work in, and make sure you spend real time together, because that's where you'll learn different ways of looking at problems, etc. And then lastly, and most importantly, the performance on the team starts with the performance of you. And one of the things we really believe at my company, we train elite athletes. We also train what I call corporate athletes. We actually provide fitness and performance services in many companies around the world. And we talk about the 4 pillars of great performance that you need as leaders, and that's mindset, movement, nutrition, and recovery. So, for those of you wanting some little tips that can help you in these crazy days that we're in with the pandemic, it starts with mindset, right? So, we call that the universal habit. And honestly, it's about goal setting. We talked about that a little earlier in the presentation. Like, this pandemic has been crazy disorientating for all of us, because you might have think about March last year. Maybe you had a great vacation plan and suddenly you're like, I don't know if I'm ever going to go on that vacation. Like, our goal lines keep moving. And so it's really important for you to think about with your mindset, how can I just do short term, short end goals that I know I can stick to, even in this crazy circumstance of a changing world and changing pandemic? Movement. So we tend to think that movement, hey, if I went for a run every day or a walk, or I did my indoor cycling or my yoga, I'm done for the day. Well, at Exos, we believe in movement snacks, we call them, particularly for those of you working from home. So what we mean by that is, don't just do 30 minutes of exercise a day. Make sure you get that body up and moving for 5-minute breaks during the day as well. Take a snack, take your phone, go for a little walk outside, listen to a little snippet of a podcast. Just keep your body moving multiple times during the day. From a nutrition standpoint, I think most of us know by now, stay away from processed foods, stay towards your healthy fruits and vegetables. And everyone's like, how do I do that when there's great ice cream in the fridge and I'm working from home? Well, it's all about preparation, guys. You got to figure out beginning of the week really how to think about where the healthy food is going to be most easily accessible for you and stack it in the fridge. And then lastly, recovery. Activities like breathing, massage, sleep, yoga, those help your mood, and a lack of recovery actually can depress your mood over time. So really important to make sure you do take that time every day. 5 minutes just for deep breathing, making sure that you get to bed on time and you turn off your devices and you get a good night's sleep. Nothing is more important than sleep in terms of accelerating your overall performance. And by the way, you can go to exosathome.com. We have lots of great breathwork exercises on there if that can be helpful for any of you. So that's it. We went through 3 quick lessons of the extremers: making failure your fuel, breaking yourself to make yourself, and then bringing out the extreme in others. And I think with that, I am going to turn to you, Sarah, for some Q&A.
Thank you so much. That was fantastic. And for anyone who hasn't read your book yet, I highly, highly recommend it. And we are giving out, I think, 50 books to the first people who fill out the survey at the end of this. And so I'm also going to mention a few page numbers as we go along because there were certain segments of the book that really, really resonated with me. And I want to make sure that people know exactly where they can jump to when they get there. All right. First, let's see. Thank you so much for the little introduction to New Zealand. We do have some Kiwis on the line. And I have to tell you, I became obsessed with Lisa Carrington, who
Oh,
is who's
skipping
the
out
flat
of
water canoeist, which
yeah.
I didn't know someone who was a canoeist could be so badass. And so that might be my new favorite sport in the Olympics. And she is like amazing. So,
Off the charts. Amazing.
and yes, she was sitting down. Um,
Yes, it was. And that it is.
All right, let's get into this. In the introduction of your book, you say that being an extremer, because that's what we're talking about. We're talking about extreme people. It's
Yep.
not about being reckless. It's not about being unrelenting in your behavior and your approach. It's not about being overly persistent. So, what does it mean? Because when people think of being extreme, they have some pretty extreme thoughts about that type of
Yeah.
person.
Yeah. It's funny because it's definitely not extremist. I call it extremer for a reason. And it's really what it is when we say it's not just about being relentless and persistent for the sake of being persistent, is like all of us have to have self-awareness as well, right? Like
Mm.
we've all had those people in our lives that just like, think about someone who stalks you on Twitter every day, but you don't understand, Sarah. You don't understand. You need to meet me. And it's like, well, maybe I don't. Like there's a side to being an extremer that is I will push with a relentless willingness to achieve a goal, but I also have the humility and self-awareness to know when I need to just pull back or I need to ask for help or I need to recognize my approach isn't working.
Oh, I like that. Those are just good lessons for all of us, right? And all right, so as an extremer, why would someone who isn't an extremer want to work with extremer
Yeah.
personalities?
Yeah, it's a great question. My husband and I have this debate all the time because I tell him I think he's an extreme. He's like, "No, I'm not." He's very introverted. He's like always saying that, I'm very different. But I think because even when you can be like the term extreme immediately takes you to, oh gosh, it's going to be an extroverted like big personality, blah 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 blah. But like one of my favorite people I consulted with a lot on the book was Susan Cain, who started that wrote the book called Quiet, which is the introvert's revolution. And she's
Yes.
a great example of an extremer because she was working in the financial industry, like way far away from being a writer, right? And then through just her exploring her own passions and stuff that she really cared about, she sort of found herself going down this path. And before long, ends up writing this incredible book, which has changed the world. It's changed business, right? Because she had that willingness to sort of discover where her own passion and her own talent intersected and not being scared of that, like going, I'm going to follow that. Even though I had pushed my career in this direction, I'm willing to follow this other thread. And that is what being an extremer is. And so I always say to people always say to me, I'm not an extremer. I'm like, not yet. Doesn't mean you can't be.
So Mariah has this question,
Yeah.
and it is around what tips do you have for helping others on your team who might need a little bit of a push to find that extreme side of themselves? Because to your point, people are introverts, people are shy. They may not recognize that they have that inside them.
Absolutely. No, and I think the most important thing is it does start with what we commonly now call the term psychological safety, like creating an environment where you're incredibly clear with the whole team that every style is welcome and every point of view is welcome. And it's about finding that person where they are and saying, how can I help you lean in confidently into the style and direction you are, as opposed to trying to say, I want you to be this thing over here. And I also really believe, and I found this from interviewing all the people in the book, almost every extremer to a T were very good at knowing what they were good at and where they needed to ask for help. And that's the other big piece, is that often I think you can pull out the sort of potential in others just by spending time going, how can I help you? Like, where is the area you may be struggling with? Maybe it's someone shy on the team for whom doing public speaking absolutely terrifies them. It's like, okay, you
Right.
don't have to do that, but may I help work with you together? Can we collaboratively do something to help move that ball forward together? And that's a way to help someone on their own journey towards where they're the most comfortable.
Well, ultimately, what we're talking about is diversity, right? We're talking about diversity of thought and experience. And these are certainly things that, in order to build an extreme team and build an extreme company, you have to have. And on page 90, there is this incredible quote, and it says, "You need talent and disruptive thinking and institutional knowledge and experience with a close eye on the day to day." And that's something I think oftentimes we as extroverts have a tendency to overlook, is that we still need the quiet time. You need people who have this institutional knowledge because they're giving back into your organization and your team something that you perhaps can't.
Yeah, totally. Totally. And I think that is the single biggest thing that thematically I learned going through this process, is that there is a tendency, I think the sort of the media around business in general really celebrates those disruptive kind of big
Mhm.
name people who went and disrupted a category and da 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 da. And I'm such a believer that no great company innovation happened without a giant team to support getting it off the ground, right? And absolutely, there were introverts and extroverts and creatives and analytical. Like, there was all sorts of people that will have made it happen. And it's so important to make sure within the team that you're celebrating all of those different pieces of the puzzle. Because I just think in general, as a media culture, we kind of like the one person on a pedestal, and it's like, not sure that's
Right.
what actually happens.
Well, a good percentage of the people who are with us today run contact centers or run customer experience organizations. And I think all of us will be in agreement that we have to have diversity in our teams, because we need to have those individuals who want to stay at an agent level and carry through all that great institutional knowledge. And then certainly we need those other individuals who are raising their hand for the next project, the next thing, the next promotion, the next movement. But as a leader, how do you think diversity helps
Yeah.
in customer experience or in customer support?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it starts with, I'm going to say what's incredibly obvious probably to your team here, but ultimately, when you're in customer support, the most important thing is empathy and understanding of the consumer that you're talking to. And you can't have empathy and understanding if you don't have a broad range of perspectives helping you to understand how different people might come to the product that you have in the market. Like, different people are going to have different issues for different reasons. And I just think it's so important in customer facing roles. Like, the more, I love this term that someone told me recently about this notion of getting proximate with people who have different backgrounds or different lifestyles than you do, because it helps if you, instead of reading articles about, whatever community that may be different to yours, just go spend time with people in those
Ooh,
communities. I love that because it's so true. Like, a coffee conversation with someone who is in your team, who has come from a different wherever in life, is going to just teach you so much more than anything. And then you're going to apply that when you're literally in a customer service experience.
oh, and that seems even more important than ever now as we're
Right.
doing these kind of experiences versus being next to one another in a face-to-face environment where we have to learn from each other in this virtual way. And so in a way that makes it more important, but also easier, because you
Yeah,
can actually reach out to more people and
that's exactly
get
right.
proximate. I
That's
like that.
exactly right.
We have a couple questions from the audience, and I want to bring these in. This one I think is fantastic. It's Any tips on how to reset when
Mm.
you've hit a wall as a leader?
It is such a good question. And yes, like I will give you a personal story. Actually, I was leading the turnaround of Gatorade, this was in the 2008 recession, right after I gave birth to my third child. And as a woman, like going through a biggest leadership challenge of my life. I mean, it's a $5 billion global business that was tanking because of the recession. And I now had three children, and I was going through all of the things that come with having just had a baby. And talk about like total burnout and needing to reset, and that I realized that I was just trying to do everything for everyone, wasn't doing any of the four things I explained in the. And sure enough, like I ended up literally burning out. And I think the first tip to reset yourself as a leader is acknowledging that you need to. And acknowledging that you need to is literally saying to your coworker, your boss, whoever it may be, I am going to take a time out and I am going to reset and I am going to need your support to do that. And then taking that step, taking a step away, I cannot say enough about getting a different perspective. Like, even
Hmm.
if that's a week long vacation, Sarah, like you are having, like childhood memories with your family, where it just gets you out of the day to day problem you're trying to solve. It's amazing how when you come back in with a fresh perspective, it doesn't feel so overwhelming, and you can actually, okay, I can see this. I can suddenly see the answer a lot more clearly.
So there is a lot of giving yourself permission to not always be on top of everything.
Totally.
And you're absolutely correct. I am on vacation this week. I'm with my family. I'm in Wisconsin. I'm currently in my dad's office. And it's it's been so fantastic. Like I feel like I'm coming back with a lot more energy. And Shafiq, you actually asked this question of how do I get my enthusiasm and energy back, which I had at the first 2 years of work. And you move around
Yeah.
from role to role. Does that play into it where you're like, all right, I've done what I've needed to do at Virgin. Now I need to move to that next thing so I can keep that energy alive. Is that part of it?
Yeah. Well, it's a great question. I mean, unfortunately for me, Sarah, as you know, I got fired twice. So
Well,
sometimes
there
it
was
wasn't like
that.
crash. But, but I would say it's a really important question about how you keep that energy up, because I do think a little bit like the Michael Jordan story. When you've been in a role for a while and you get to mastery, it is easy to kind of go, tapping your fingers a little bit. And it's so important for you or people you're leading to say, like, where is that sort of stretch assignment that pushes them in a new direction comes
Ah,
from. I think that's really important. But I would also say sometimes we all work in roles where, for whatever reason, the pace that the company is growing may not be as fast as you personally need to grow. So it doesn't mean you can't say, okay, I want to stretch myself outside of work, go take a course in creative design or whatever, something that stretches you so you're actually like applying your sort of the part of your brain that's wanting to be stimulated as you're thinking about what
mhm.
your next opportunity may be. Because I do believe, I absolutely believe that through all of our careers, like I talk about in the book, checking yourself out, trying different things, having different roles, super important. However, leapfrogging and jumping all the time because you're bored isn't always good either, right? You've got to make sure you're getting depth, that you're really staying in a role long enough to make sure you're getting enough learning and experience to carry forward.
That I think is an incredible piece of advice that it's not about just leaving the job, it's figuring out what are the things I could also be doing within the role. And I do believe there are probably a lot of people out there who felt a little stuck in this past year and a half. Their roles changed. I know my roles changed
Yeah,
significantly. We're not running physical events at the moment and haven't been. So there's a pretty major pivot, and it does require you to go, oh, what do I have to learn in
yeah,
order to be exceptional at this?
yep,
Because I didn't know how to do this before.
totally.
Um, You talked about stretch goals, and Mark has a question of, as a leader, how do you set the next goals to be achievable and stretch goals, but
Mhm.
then not demotivate your team if they happen to fail?
Yeah. Yeah. So no, it's really like I struggle with this, Mark, all the time because I think my team would always say, like, I'm always like further, further, like, and it is so important that you really do get the sort of the pulse of everyone's expertise in terms of where is the right place to land. So I'm a big fan, like with my team, of doing the sort of everybody independently slash anonymously, like on a scale of 1 to 10, if the goal is this, how likely do you think we're going to hit it? And if you find that everyone's on a 90, it's like, all right, we can probably go a little higher, you know. Whereas if they're all down the other end, it gives you a sense of where people from different perspectives believe the business can push to. So, and I think it brings them along on the journey about like, we've got to land on this together. There is nothing worse in the world than setting high targets and then teams are demotivated and they don't run after them because that's your fault in the end. Like, it's not going to work. Now, your question about failure, I really, really believe that it's so important as leaders to model that it's okay to fail and learn. Like failing for the sake of failing and like destroying company resources, not good. Failing and wow, we learned something that we're carrying forward into how we're now succeeding. Super good. And I feel so lucky in my career. I've had amazing leaders like the Gatorade turnaround. I remember the first 6 months we tried a few things that didn't work very well. And like I had a boss who was willing to like put up with it and like stick with me, and that taught me how important it is as the leader to set the tone that I would rather you took the risk and failed when you show me how you're carrying it forward and learning, which in that case, we obviously ended up in a very successful place. So it is important as the leader to model that that's okay.
And you've taken a lot of big risks in your personal career, but also in the companies that you have led. And then those things haven't always worked out. And you brought this up. You got fired from Virgin, page 89 for anybody who wants to read it because it really is a fascinating story. And so, how did you maintain that self confidence? Because this is a question from Vinti who wants to know how, they're petrified of
Yeah.
being fired. So how do you maintain that self-confidence if that possibly
That
could
happens.
happen?
Yeah. Well, it's so funny because I actually teach an entire workshop, Vinci, on this now. because
Really?
Yeah, because I found when I was going around doing engagements like this, it's incredible how fearful people are of getting fired. And yet, when you ask people, if we were all sitting in a giant room in a conference center right now, and I said, raise your hands who's been fired, you'd be shocked how many hands would go up. It's a very common occurrence. And the reality is that when you get fired, and obviously the first time it happened to me, I was 26. I was absolutely blindsided. And by the way, I lost my green card application. I lost my work visa. I was like, they gave me a one-way ticket back to New Zealand. They were like, you are so bad. We do not want you in our company or our country. I mean, it was like awful. Um,
That's
but
like getting fired to the absolute
oh
extreme.
yeah, if
I
you
don't
get
want you in my company or my country. You have to go.
basically. But what I would say is that it's like anything. It's never, I think the fear of that was far worse than when it actually happened. Because when it happens, what do? Obviously, you do a lot of self reflection and you feel really bad for a week or so. And then you're like, you actually have no choice but to just pick yourself up and go, I'm going to start networking. And it is remarkable how quickly momentum begins to build. It just does. And then before long, you move in your next role and then things are fine and you never look back. And I kind of feel like I have this whole topic around failure in general, whether it's being fired, whether it's bet the company resources on this and what if it doesn't work out? There's all sorts of things we're scared of. And it's really funny when you ask people about failure, like they can articulate in so many ways awful failures that happened in their life and how awful it was and it was terrible and da da da. And then when you say, what was the actual consequence of that failure, almost to a T, everyone's like, nothing. Like, you know what I mean? It's like I've heard the amazing stories. Like there was a woman who was at one of my workshops. She was like a very senior PR leader who used to be in her 20s a springboard diver, and she had this dive that went wrong and the whole team lost. And like the way she described it, like I was getting sweaty. It was so bad. And then you say, so what happened? And she realizes as she reflects, well, my actually I wouldn't have had the career I'm in today if that had worked, and that's generally what happens. And so fear of getting fired is almost, in fact, I can guarantee you, is a million times worse than the reality. It's actually not bad at all.
Well, but even so, a lot of people though may not want to get fired. And so
I would
I
agree. Nor would I.
I there were some lessons in the book that I thought were just so spot on that, hey, if I had done this, I probably wouldn't have gotten fired. Like, don't just focus on yourself and your strengths. Like, you also have to look at what the business needs and what the industry is doing. And I think
Yes.
we, particularly when we're in something that we're so passionate about, it's sometimes challenging for us as individuals to not be looking forward and be like, oh, well, the company needs this, but I want to give you
Yes.
this.
Yep. 100%.
And you also said make sure your leaders are bought in.
Yes.
And I thought that was such a fantastic piece of advice
Mhm.
is, you have to keep your leaders on the same page with you. And,
Yeah.
or at least you have to be communicating to them what it is that you want and what you potentially want to change within the
Yeah.
company.
Yeah. No, it's so true. And I think it's human nature that whoever we are in our jobs, like we want to show up at all times with the right answer, with
Hmm.
everything buttoned up and figured out, because then that means I'm doing my job well. And think about your own self, like how you feel when someone on your team brings you something buttoned up that you don't get any opportunity to give any input to. Like
Right.
you even though for them they're like, "Look, I did everything perfect." You're sitting there going, I wanted to be part of that process." And I think that's the piece is like it's so important to just say, "I need help" to a leader. That just gets them instantly bought in on the project or whatever it is you're trying to do. It doesn't make them go, "Gosh, that person sucks. I shouldn't have hired them." It makes them go, hey, they're really being thoughtful in terms of making sure, is this meeting the needs and are they getting my input and advice?
We at Zendesk, we recently hired a new fantastic CMO,
Oh,
and
yeah.
her name is Alex, and she said almost exactly that
Really?
during her first town hall to all of the marketing team. She said, essentially, I want to be part of the process. I want to be brought in not to tell you what to do, but so that I can actually provide input
Yeah.
on what you're doing so that collectively we can create something better and stronger and more impactful. And that you're not going this way when I need you to go this
Yeah.
way.
Yeah.
So, really great piece of advice.
That's a great,
Um,
great one.
and we're also getting some incredible questions.
Oh,
Christine, I love this question so much, Christine, because I think this has happened so much over the past year and a half. How do you support a team that is change fatigued, Sarah? Because their organization is constantly changing. We've had so many companies, and you and I can probably like rattle off a dozen of them without even trying very hard, where they've had to pivot
yeah.
extremely hard this past year. But that's really challenging for employees too.
Yeah, 100%. It's a fantastic question because honestly, I don't think any of us really have the answers right now because it's happening daily. Like, literally, I live here in the United States. What Sarah and I were just talking about with the Delta variant, like, we were rapidly reopening, and now we've got to go back and not. And it is unbelievably exhausting on teammates. And I would say, honestly, the best way to start is with the sort of overall mental health and health of the teammate themselves. It's like, it might just be that you've got to put a lot more thought and time into giving them the space to process, giving them the space to get space so that they actually have the energy to come back. I think the other thing I would say is really important is setting expectations around how messy and full of change it's going to be. And I remember the beginning of the pandemic. So my business, I was telling Sarah, 400 gym sites. Who wants to be in the gym business in a pandemic? Not me, right? But we had to quickly pivot, all the things you can imagine, and we've had to do a lot of what many of you out there have had to do, like creating new delivery vehicles and stuff. And I remember saying to my team early on, this is going to be messy. Like we think it's this, and we're going to go this way. We're going to go, no, this way, no, this way. It's going to take it. And I think one of the things I'm so glad I did was that, because the moments when it was the toughest, when people were like, I'm so sick of the change, I was able to say, but remember, that's what it was supposed to be. And that means we're actually heading on the right path because we're experimenting, iterating to get there. So I do think it's important about just setting that expectation with people and then figuring out, it's like running a marathon, right? Like, when are you giving people time to pull off the side, get caught up, recharge the batteries? Someone else does the running for a while. That, like, how are you making sure you're really building in those moments of just breaks and perspective building?
I'm so glad you brought up just mental health
Yes.
and about giving us this opportunity. Like when you were at the very end of your presentation, even when you were talking about movement snacks, and I
Yeah.
was like, oh, what a
Yeah.
simple
Yeah.
but yet powerful way to
Yeah.
take this in, where it's like, no, in the middle of the day, I don't have to believe that I have to go to the gym for an hour.
No.
I take that 5 minutes. I have 5 minutes in between calls, and if I don't, I need to build them in. I need to
Yep.
find that space.
Yep. Put them in your calendar, 100%. Put them in your calendar. Even literally, like, because we're all sitting in chairs and getting sore
Ugh.
backs, and it's like just sitting on the floor and stretching for 5 minutes will make a difference to how your brain feels. I'll tell you another really funny one that I enjoy because of the fact that we're in homes more. Because we study a lot of the connection between physical and mental, like how you get the brain to perform at its best. And there's real science that, when you all sit down to, you've got to write a presentation or write something creative, or you might be a designer coming up with work, and it's hard to, sometimes you can get writer's block or you can get stuck. If you go and walk or skip or run, it's like scientifically proven that it's almost like it jumbles your brain around, and you come back and you'll suddenly find that ideas will start flowing again. And so it's so important when we're in our homes, you do have a bit more flexibility. Like, you can break it up a little bit. You can do those little movement snacks through the day just to help keep you from going stir crazy sitting in a chair staring all day.
That is so very, very true. And I know you do not have a crystal ball, but we're going to talk a little bit about what you see for the future, because you wrote this book, what, back in 2017? Is that
Yep.
right? And you clearly had some foreshadowing on what was coming ahead and what companies and people needed to do. Like, even reading chapter 10, which is break yourself to make
Yeah.
yourself, it's such a relevant chapter for today, because being in this very adaptive, flexible space, having to go in these new directions, and you quoted the old Nike slogan of "There is no finish line," which that's
Mhm.
all we're all going through that, right? But
Yeah.
what do you see? What do you see happening?
Yeah.
Be it people going back into offices,
Mhm.
people like, how are we going to create relationships with people we don't meet anymore? Like, what do you see happening in our
Yeah.
business?
I spend a lot of time thinking about this at the moment. And I do think there's no question that the person who asked the question about, change fatigue teams, I think for the next 5 to 10 years, we have to be much more comfortable with a lot of change happening around us, because it's, even the pandemic, it's like we don't even know, like, we may stamp this one out, we don't know what's the next thing that's coming our way that's going to throw us off our stride. And so I do think when it comes to like work, I really do believe that the future is going to be hybrid. There's no way we're going back to, we've eliminated a lot of really stupid unproductive time in our days. That's great, but
Yes.
we have to be super intentional about it. And I think that you actually, if you're really thoughtful, like we're doing a lot of work with our team at the moment about how do we structure the average week so that
Mhm.
everyone, like, there's certain days that everybody does collaboration meetings, there's certain days that you do your one-on-one coaching with your teammates, there's certain days that we know are going to be giant, like, informative, get information out calls, because I think that way it's like when you're in, physical presence of someone, use that time so preciously and wisely, because when you go back into your little box in your office, you can get a lot of done, a follow-up done. You don't want to waste the time doing the wrong task in the wrong place. And I also think it's going to be really important to understand how different roles need to work to be most effective. Like think about those sort of analytical people at the end of the month putting out the financial statements and stuff. Like, what do they need in that time frame versus in the middle of the month when they're doing other tasks? Like, what does everyone need so you can be more intentional about when you use these various tools to collaborate?
So what I hear you saying is, as leaders, we have to get incredibly intentional with our teams, and
Yeah.
we have to know what motivates them. We have to understand, what their needs are, and it's not just a one and done, is it? It's I got to keep checking in because what you need at the beginning of the month might not be what you need halfway through or partway in the quarter.
Totally. And I think we also have to get comfortable that what we all design for our sort of way we work in January of 2022 will have flipped on its head by January 2023. I just think that is. And so be comfortable with when your teammates go, this isn't working for me anymore. Okay, that means we need to move on.
We have to think of something else. Well,
Mhm.
and that kind of plays into we're getting a few questions around um, team dynamics and
Yeah.
team relationships. And Sharon has this question around recruiting. And how do you recruit people who are different, which
Mhm.
spurs different ideas and diversity versus I need a cultural fit? Like,
Mm,
those two play together. You're so
mhm.
different, but what about my culture?
Yeah, it's a really great question. So I think that like culture is I think most of you like us would have your cultural values well stated, and I think like everything begins with culture. It's like we've just been going through a restated value exercise at work, and what one of the things we talk a lot about is like the value is respect. Now, we ask people from all walks of the business to articulate what that word means to them. When they hear that word, what does it mean? How does it come to life? And that's the diversity piece, right? It's like you want to make sure that you're not hiring the same kind of people with the same kind of thinking. But at the end of the day, I think values and culture are pretty universal, and it's like you either believe, like one of ours is we're a team based culture. We don't like individuals who like to be, taking the spotlight. And we're very upfront about that when we hire people. Now, that doesn't mean we can't get people from every country in the world that would really resonate with that cultural value. And we have to keep pushing ourselves to do that. But I almost feel like the cultural values of a company are sort of like that very strong guiding light that should
Mhm.
not change. And it doesn't matter what country you come from, those values and that culture can truly be universal or should be universal.
Well, I'm so glad you talked about the different cultures from around the world because there's this question from Caroline around what do you suggest if you have teams in different regions that display very different appetites towards stretch targets? We talked about stretch targets earlier. We all work for the same company, but not everyone wants to work at the same pace or at the same stretch. How do you reconcile that difference?
It's a really great question. And I think sometimes it's about finding people from the two different country teams and almost fostering the conversation with yourself, like having them talk through, like, why is one feeling it one way and the other is the other? Like, how can they almost help you collectively solve for what is the common ingredient that you can all align on? Because
Mm.
there is no question, like different mean, look at, Americans, hard charging Americans compared to certain parts of Europe that have been on vacation for 4 weeks, 6 weeks. Like there's no
Oh, we
question
never talk about the Europeans going on vacation for 6 weeks. Come on.
ever. But I do think it's about, okay, so how are we going to find the common ground that we can both align on so that it feels fair? It's important.
We have very little time left, which I know I told you this was going to go so quickly. But one of the questions, since we have so many people in that customer experience space,
Yeah.
I want to ask you as a CEO, and you're the CEO of Exos, you're the CEO of Flywheel Sports. These are really big deals. These were, uh, how does customer support and customer experience help you succeed as a CEO?
Oh, it's everything, in my opinion, because it's funny, like customer support and customer experience is like, that is like like at Flywheel, I remember every sale we would make of this new Fly streaming bike that we had created. Often at the beginning of a product launch like that, everything's going wrong. Everything's going wrong. And it's like all the customer support team is getting is like, what we know what happens when everything goes wrong. Yet they are the moment that can change the entire brand experience from a really bad one to one that not only turns the customer but can lead to referral, can lead to so many things. And I truly, truly, to me, it's the first place of the business cycle that if it goes wrong, you have nothing else matters. You can't make up for it.
And as CEO, what do I need to bring to you as your support leader, as your customer experience leader? What do I need to bring to you so that you're like, I know customer support is front and center in my organization? Like, are there
Yeah.
certain metrics? Are there certain numbers? Is there certain data? What do you want to know?
I mean, honestly, every business has different metrics they're looking at, but I would answer it simply with the unvarnished truth. And I think customer support is usually the place where you can get the data, and everyone has the data, but you also have the real insights around, somebody sent in the chat that this was working for this reason. I like that. Like you get the sort of anecdotal side of it as well. And I think having everybody have real exposure to that and understanding that these aren't just numbers, they're real human customers, and bringing that context is incredibly important.
You hit on one of the things that is probably most important to me in the customer service space, and that is there is a human behind every one of those numbers. And you talked about intrinsic motivation, and it's the number is only telling you that there's a behavior that's happening and
Yes,
what
yes,
is going on that is causing that
yeah,
behavior, and what does that person need to either keep that behavior going or
yeah,
to stop that behavior.
yeah,
And that is I love that. So
yeah.
coming back to the intrinsic motivation. All right,
Yes, look at you, Sarah.
I pay attention. I pay attention. Last question. Like Daniel wants to know, what is your advice to be a great leader and change the world?
Oh, to be a great leader and change the world. I would honestly say the first thing that comes into my head is just really care for the people that you are leading.
Oh, that's a good one. Care about your people. All right.
Mm.
That is all the time we
This
have.
has been so
I
fun.
know this was so much fun, and thank you so much, Sarah. And thank you to everyone for sharing a moment with us. You can give us feedback by clicking on the provide feedback button at the top, or check the chat. I know one of my colleagues put a short survey in the chat. And as I mentioned earlier, the first 50 respondents will get a free copy of Sarah's book, Extreme You. It is a fabulous read. I highly recommend it. And make sure then you pass it on and give it to a colleague. And please join us next time for a CX Moment. We're on September 23rd, and we're going to be talking with the Boston Globe. In the meantime, be safe, be helpful, and we'll chat again soon. Bye, everyone.
Bye.